Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. Also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Getting updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Taking a look at the one advisory that we do have out, this is the same flood advisory that we have out for the Chena River, particularly near Hunts Creek. We do have some of the flooding caused by ice jam, so if you're in the area, be mindful of that. That is now out until tomorrow afternoon, that is out until Saturday night, so be mindful in that area. We do have continued flooding. In addition, we have some areas of thin ice developing all around this interior portion of the state. This is actually a Facebook post that the Fairbanks Forecast Office put out, targeting some of that thin ice where we are seeing some of the snow melt forming water on top of ice in a lot of locations around the interior. So be mindful. It can be dangerous out there on the river and lake ice conditions that have developed or continue to develop as we continue to push into the breakup season. Down in south central Alaska, however, things are starting to look a lot more mild. We are having some sunshine return over the weekend. So for some areas around Talkeetna, Anchorage, Glen Allen, Valdez, we are looking at a lot nicer conditions for the weekend, even if some of those locations are a little bit cloudy now on Friday. However, Homer is going to stay a little bit more in the clouds, but temperatures are going to be up in those low 50s, so still should be pretty mild overall. But now as we enter into the breakup time frame, we're going to continue to update with our breakup map until breakup is over. Right now, most of the state still has ice-covered rivers. We do have the Tanana River that is mostly open right now, but the majority of locations are still ice-covered. Make sure to check out the River Forecast Center's webpage, weather.gov/APRFC. Again, that's weather.gov/APRFC. You can get any updates to the breakup conditions in your area. Right now, still, we do have quite a bit of ice cover for the rivers. Taking a look at our satellite imagery, we'll start out west where we have frontal system with a couple lows embedded in it, pushing through the western and central Aleutians, bringing some cloud cover and precipitation to the islands. We have another system right over the Alaska Peninsula, and we can watch this system spin out into southeastern portions of the Bering, bringing some precipitation to areas around the Alaska Peninsula. South of Kodiak Island, we can watch another low coming up towards the Gulf of Alaska, not quite bringing a lot of precip to any land locations yet, but pushing into the Gulf. And then we can look out over much of mainland Alaska in this last loop, quite a bit of the clear skies out there, as we are seeing some of that cloud cover further to the south and up north, but high pressure in those areas starting to make some nicer conditions for much of the mainland. As we look at the conditions for the remainder of the day, we can see that high pressure up along the Arctic coastline, where we do have some lighter areas of snow just to the north of the Brooks Range on the north slope. And we do also have some areas of fog from the Utqiagvik area down towards Point Hope, down in the Kotzebue Sound area, and then also down by St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Strait. As we look throughout the rest of mainland Alaska, we have some precipitation developing in the Alaska Range and further to the south. Higher elevations, expecting to see a lot of snow. But as we get to those lower elevations, and especially as we get near to the water, we are expecting primarily rain. Our flow pattern is off the southeast coming off of the Gulf, so we are expecting a lot of that to be rain with those warmer conditions being brought in. Down over the Panhandle area, we are going to see rain in most locations. Again, in the more northern locations, higher elevations, expecting that to be a mix with some snow. As we look out over the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians, our low pressure is bringing some rain to those areas, with a rain and snow mix closer to the Pribilof Islands. And then out by the central and western Aleutians, our frontal system there is bringing in a rain and snow mix to most of those locations. Some areas are going to see primarily rain, however. As we move into tonight, enough warm air in that area to bring all rain to the islands, and more rain for the eastern Aleutians as well, with the low pressure that's moving in over the area, and some lighter showers out over the Alaska Peninsula. Out over the Gulf, we have multiple lows continuing to bring in warmer air and rain all throughout the North Gulf Coast, with heaviest amounts going to be in southeast Alaska, where we are expecting heavier rain in the area, and some areas further to the north and higher elevations still going to see some snow. As we move into mainland Alaska, we have some snow out over the Copper River Basin and eastern portions of the Alaska Range, but high pressure up north, keeping the rest of mainland Alaska dry. However, there will be quite a bit of cloud cover with some of the stratus caught underneath that high pressure. As we move into Saturday, we have a weaker trough moving in over the Arctic coastline, bringing in some showers just to the west of the coast. But for the most part, mainland Alaska still under the effects of ridging, especially the high that is out over northwestern portions of Canada, extending in the ridging out over mainland Alaska. Some clear skies developing for much of Saturday for mainland. But as we drop down into the Alaska Panhandle, we do have our low pressure system and frontal system pushing in closer towards the southern portions of the Panhandle, continuing to bring that heavier rain to areas throughout the central and southern portions of the Panhandle. Out by Kodiak Island, a weaker low out there, bringing in some lighter rain showers to the Kodiak Island area, and then our continued stalling out front over the central and western Aleutians, bringing rain to the area, with our other lows stalling out over the eastern Aleutians, bringing some lighter showers to that area. Finally, as we move into Sunday, the lows out by the Aleutians continuing to fill and become weaker, but we are still going to see some lighter showers over the central and eastern Aleutians. Mainland Alaska going to continue to stay out of much of the precipitation on Sunday until we get up along the Arctic coastline, where the low moving through is going to bring some snow, lighter snow to the western portions of the Arctic coast, a little bit heavier snow with some areas of blowing snow for eastern portions along the coastline. And then finally down in the Gulf, our lows still bringing in heavier rain to southern portions of the Panhandle, a little bit more moderate to lighter rain as we get further to the north, and the trough pushing in along the North Gulf Coast, bringing rain to Yakutat, not quite making it to many south central locations as of Sunday. Taking a look at our temperatures for Sunday morning, we'll start off in the Panhandle, dropping down to right around 40 degrees for most locations, a little bit colder Yakutat, dropping down to 36 degrees. In south central, mid-30s there as well. A little bit colder as we get further to the north. Talkeetna at 29, Glen Allen at 25, and closer to 40 along the coastline, with Kodiak getting down to 40 degrees as well. In the interior, eastern locations are going to get into the teens. Western locations going to be a little bit warmer, especially as we move into southwest, dropping down into the upper 20s to lower 30s for most locations. Single digits as we get closer towards the Brooks Range, with Bettles dropping down to 7 degrees, through the pass at 2 degrees. Then along the Arctic coastline, single digits out west, negative temperatures as we get further to the east, with Dead Horse dropping down to minus 12, coldest in the state Saturday morning. Kotzebue Sound area dropping down into the teens. In the Norton Sound area, northern locations into the teens, southern locations into the lower 20s. YK Delta is going to be right around 30 degrees, with Bethel at 31 degrees for that low. Then as we move into the Bristol Bay area, mid to upper 30s is expected. Iliamna at 34 degrees. In the Alaska Peninsula, mid 30s are expected. Sandpoint getting down to 36. Eastern Aleutians and Central Aleutians in the lower to mid 30s. That's going to be true of the Western Aleutians as well. And then 31 degrees expected low for St. Paul. High temperatures for Saturday afternoon. Pribilof Islands getting back up into the mid 30s, right around 40 degrees for the Central and Western Aleutians. Into the mid 40s as we move towards the Eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, and then into the 50s for some of the Bristol Bay area, into the mid 40s for a lot of the YK Delta. Colder along the coast, warmer as we get to more interior locations. Bethel getting up to 52 degrees, Aniak at 50 degrees. In the Norton Sound area, mid 30s. Colder at Gamble, 29 degrees expected high. And then in the mid-20s for much of the Kotzebue Sound area. Kotzebue itself getting a little bit warmer, 29 degrees. Then in the right around 20 degrees for western portions of the Arctic coastline. Single digits as we move off to the east. In the interior portion of the state, right around 40 degrees. A little bit warmer for the similar southeastern locations. McGrath, 45 degrees. Mid-40s to upper 40s for south central Alaska, and then mid to upper 40s for the Panhandle as well, getting right around 50 degrees as we get further to the south. Sunday morning dropping down to the mid to lower 40s for the Panhandle area. Mid-30s for much of south central by the water, colder as we get further inland. Into the teens to lower 20s for interior Alaska. In the teens along the Arctic coastline and for the Kotzebue Sound area. Into the 20s for the Norton Sound area. Mid-20s for the YK Delta, mid-30s for the Bristol Bay area and Alaska Peninsula, then mid-30s throughout the Aleutian Islands as well. So we move into Sunday afternoon, getting up into the upper 30s to right around 40 degrees for the Aleutians, into the 50s for the Bristol Bay area, mid to upper 40s for the YK Delta. Seward Peninsula going to see temperatures in the 30s in the south and 20s to the north. Teens along much of the Arctic coastline. In the 40s for interior Alaska, right around 50 degrees for south central, and lower 50s expected for the Panhandle area.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with our flying weather on Saturday morning. Out over the Bering Sea, widespread IFR conditions are expected. However, as we make it into mainland Alaska, a lot of that is going to diminish, and we are expecting primarily VFR. Some areas along the west coast are going to see a mix of VFR and IFR conditions. And then up along the Arctic coastline and in the Brooks Range, we are going to see some MVFR conditions and isolated areas of MVFR for south central Alaska. Down in the Panhandle, we are going to see some marginal conditions throughout Saturday morning, and as we move into Saturday afternoon, those conditions are expected to linger throughout the Panhandle area. Mainland Alaska should be largely VFR for Saturday afternoon, with the exception of along the west coast where some MVFR and IFR conditions will last. As we move into the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, widespread IFR conditions are expected, with the exception of the western Aleutians where a small area of VFR conditions will move through. As we move into Sunday morning, that area will start to push off to the east, and we'll have more MVFR conditions for the western Aleutians. The rest of the Bering and Aleutians are going to see IFR conditions. And then we are going to see some more MVFR and IFR conditions along the west coast, especially as we get into the Kotzebue Sound area. From northern portions of the interior through the Brooks Range and Arctic coast, expecting MVFR conditions. MVFR conditions throughout much of the southern portion of mainland Alaska, with some MVFR conditions around Cook Inlet. Down in the Panhandle area, we are going to still see MVFR conditions, with the addition of some IFR conditions in southern portions. As we move into Sunday afternoon, southern locations of the Panhandle are going to see some MVFR conditions, with IFR throughout much of the areas closest to the Gulf, but MVFR conditions for central and northern portions of the Panhandle. Much of mainland Alaska, especially central and southern portions, going to expect to see some VFR conditions Sunday afternoon, but as we get into the Brooks Range and Arctic coastline, expecting to see MVFR conditions. Then for much of the central and eastern portions of the Bering and Aleutians, we are expecting IFR conditions with MVFR conditions further to the west. Looking through our passes, starting up north at AKwx Pass, MVFR conditions expected to improve to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Similar conditions at Adigan, we're going to start off marginal, improve to VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill also starting MVFR, improving to VFR in the afternoon. Rainy Pass starting MVFR, improving to VFR. Windy Pass should be VFR throughout the day, as well as Isabel Pass, with Mentasta starting off marginal and then improving to VFR conditions in the afternoon. Tenedo Pass will be similar, starting off marginal, improving to VFR, as well as at Portage. Then for Chilkoot and White, both expected to be MVFR throughout the day on Saturday. For our freezing levels, our surface freezing line is riding just to the north of the Panhandle area, then through south central Alaska and southwest, out through the central portions of the Bering Sea. We have an area of warmer air pushing in over southwest Alaska with freezing levels as high as 4,000 feet over southwest, and then another little area of warmer air by the Panhandle, again getting up to as high as 4,000 feet for the freezing levels. Looking at our icing starting off in southwest Alaska, above 7,000 feet is expected for the Panhandle area. We'll have another area between 4,000 and 8,000 feet over southwest Alaska to include much of the Alaska Peninsula, and then some isolated areas along the Arctic coastline above 8,000 feet are expected. Taking a look at our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet is south of the Aleutians out of a westerly direction, 150 knots. However, the speeds over the Aleutian Islands will be closer towards 80 knots, still out of that west direction. We have some stronger winds out over the northern portion of the state coming in at a northwesterly direction, around as high as 60 knots. And then another area of stronger winds just to the south of the Panhandle out of the west, 100 knots, but winds moving in over the Panhandle out of a southerly direction, 75 knots. Then a weaker area of winds out over the YK Delta area out of the east at 40 knots. So look at 9,000 feet, pretty similar flow with the strongest winds near the Aleutians and out by the Panhandle area. Out over the Aleutians, we're looking at winds out of the west around 45 knots. Out over the Panhandle, just to the east of the Panhandle, 65 knots. But as we move over the Panhandle area, dropping down southern portions up to as high as 45, but diminishing closer towards 20 as we get closer to the north. Near the Yakutat area, out of the east, 25 knots is expected. And over southwest Alaska, we're looking at easterly winds around 30 knots. And another area of stronger winds up by the eastern portions of the Arctic coast, out of the north, 25 knots. Dropping down to 3,000 feet, flow over mainland Alaska is out of the east, with an area in the interior as high as 35 knots. Near Cook Inlet, also 35 knots, and along much of the North Gulf Coast at 35 knots as well, picking up to as high as 50 knots over the Panhandle. As we look over the central Aleutian Islands, out of the west, 40 to 45 knots, it's going to extend out over to the west. As we look at our turbulence, 3 areas of turbulence, starting off in the central Aleutians below 3,000 feet as expected, below 4,000 feet over the Bristol Bay area, closer towards Kodiak Island as well, and then below 5,000 feet for the Panhandle.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Dave Snider, and joining me again is Cindy Preller. She's the Tsunami Program Manager for Alaska Region's National Weather Service. Thanks again for joining us, Cindy.
Thanks for having me back, Dave.
Sure thing. And I love saying Tsunami Program Manager for Alaska's National Weather Service because that's not weather. Why is the Tsunami Program part of the National Weather Service?
Well, it's because the Weather Service absolutely rocks at warning people for every kind of, devastating natural hazard.
The mission of the Weather Service is to protect life and property. And so how does the Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska, which is a very unique office, again, within the Weather Service, it's not weather, how do those folks help us protect life and property?
The National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer is a national warning center, and we analyze seismic traces 24/7 all around the world. So when there's an earthquake anywhere on the planet, we see it and analyze it within minutes.
Within minutes, and
Within
there's
minutes.
actually a goal to have it under, was it 5 minutes?
If there is a tsunami warning to be issued for continental America, we must get that out, or shoot to get that out in 5 minutes.
Okay. Now that's not something I have ever learned to do, so I know it would be a struggle for me to do that under probably hours, but it is fascinating to watch, and the office is open on a regular basis for tours, right?
Absolutely, come by Friday.
Okay.
Yep, every Friday at 1, 2, and 3 p.m. and they're open public free tours. And it's the most interesting place on the planet. You really should check it out.
Okay, and the office team is made up of people that are earth scientists, not meteorologists or atmospheric scientists. Talk about some of the types of people that work there.
Right, we are out of place in our National Weather Service, but we are geologists, geophysicists, oceanographers. We even have an astrophysicist on board, computer software architects, electronic technicians that are brilliant and innovative. Our software is all written in-house. Our instrumentation is designed in-house. So it's a really, really unique place, and it's just a couple handfuls of people that work there. So
sure.
Yeah.
One of my favorite ways to get a tsunami alert message is on Twitter.
Right.
And I can follow the Twitter address, and we'll put that up on the screen for you there. But it's usually a very quick message that tells you initially what the magnitude of an earthquake could be and about where its epicenter was. What are some of the other ways that you can get that alert message?
Well, Twitter's my favorite too.
Yeah.
And you don't even need a Twitter account to receive it. So
That's
it just comes in like an SMS message. But you can also receive it via email, weather radio, of course, the crawler on your television screen, on the internet, Google Alerts.
Right.
Marine radio if you're out in harbors and boats. Actually, marine radio is probably,
yeah, it is a good one.
That's our partnership with the Coast Guard. We're really grateful for that, absolutely. But there's a variety of ways in dissemination.
Okay.
And locally, excuse me, I'm sorry, but locally in the communities, the sirens will go off as well.
Right. So lots of different ways to get that very important message very quickly when that matters to you. One of the ways that the Warning Center practices with communities is a test on a yearly basis, right?
Right.
How does that work?
Thanks for bringing that up. It's a controversial issue, but it's super important to help us warn better and really serve Alaskans. So the week of March 27th, the commemoration of the 1964 event, for that week we have a Tsunami Preparedness Week every year. We like communities to get out and do drills and practice and do everything we can to raise awareness. And part of that is a live code test where we actually issue the warning message live and we activate the emergency alert system, which means sirens go off, the TV crawler happens, and it's a test.
We're doing everything that would normally happen without the real threat of the tsunami, just to practice as much as possible.
Right, and this is a major partnership with the State of Alaska, Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, the Emergency Operations Center, and the Alaska Broadcasters Association. Without the media, we wouldn't be able to do this. So the three groups really work tightly together to do our best to warn, educate the public that this is happening so they don't wonder and get scared about it. It has been remarkable what we've learned. I mean, it pretty much breaks somewhere every time,
Sure.
but then we fix it and it gets better. So a quick example is just a few years ago, we used to, when we issued a message, it would activate the entire state.
Right.
Right? I mean, Kotzebue, Nome, Bethel, everybody would be in tsunami warning. And so now we can regionalize it to where the actual event is taking place.
Right.
That's pretty huge.
Right, right. So identifying points of failure and also points of success and making sure we continue down that successful path so that folks are warned as quickly and accurately as possible.
Absolutely. And, you know, to get our communities involved to prep themselves, prep their businesses, prep their tourism, prep their schools, you know, just make this an annual thing they need to be doing.
Right. So as citizens wanting to be prepared, we should be prepared to learn more about that test that's happening usually toward the end of March every year.
Right, and you should be happy that it's happening.
Right.
Instead of upset. Definitely be happy that it's happening.
Right. Just as we test tornado sirens in tornado country, we also have to test the tsunami program as well.
Right, because there isn't enough time. You know, for a local tsunami, the wave will arrive in less than 2 minutes. So it's super important that people know what to do.
Very good. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for helping us know more about the Tsunami Ready program and the test. And the Tsunami Warning Center is a very unique and very important job in the National Weather Service that is just fascinating to me every time I visit the office. So,
It's the only one for the continent. You really should come check it out.
it's an international effort.
Yes.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Dave.
And thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Dave Snider. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
For the marine forecast, we'll start off with a look at our ice edge. With the persistent east to northeast winds that we've been seeing, we have been seeing the main edge of the ice continuing to push a little bit to the south and west, especially once you get to the west of Nunavik Island. Now that is a lot of strips of ice breaking off from that main ice pack as opposed to the entire ice pack moving. We do still have quite a few breaks and melting in between the ice edge and the shore fast ice, and a lot of polynyas along the west coast all the way from the Bristol Bay area up through the Kotzebue Sound area, developing with some of the warmer air and those offshore winds. As we look down into southeast Alaska and the inside waters, we do have northerly winds 15 to 20 knots expected for Saturday. And then as we drop down into southern locations, becoming southeasterly around 25 knots. Out over southern portions of the Gulf, southeasterly winds around 30 knots, becoming easterly at 25, and then becoming northeasterly at 15 to 20 as we get closer towards Yakutat. Seas as high as 12 feet in the southern portions of the Gulf. Then on Sunday in the inside waters, northerly flow 15 knots for the central and northern locations. As we move to the south, southerly winds 30 knots expected, seas up to as high as 12 feet in the inside waters. And then out over the Gulf southern portion, southeasterly winds 35 knots with 14 feet for seas, becoming more easterly as we move further to the north around 25 knots. For south central Alaska, lighter winds in Cook Inlet for Saturday in the northern portions at 10 knots, picking up and becoming more northerly as we move down into southern Cook Inlet and west of the Barren Islands at 20 knots. East of the Barren Islands, northeast winds 30 knots expected, and diminishing as we move further up north in the Gulf to 15 to 20 knots out of an east to northeast direction. In Prince William Sound, northerly winds 10 knots. For Sunday, continuing to see northerly winds 10 knots in the Prince William Sound area, 20 knots out of a northeasterly direction for much of the Gulf, and then northeasterly winds for Cook Inlet area 10 to 15 knots, stronger as we get further to the south. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, northeasterly winds 25 knots around Kodiak Island, dropping down to 15 to 20 as we get by the peninsula, with seas as high as 7 feet around Kodiak Island. Then on Sunday, continuing to see northeast winds by Kodiak 15 to 20 knots, becoming northerly to northwesterly as we move further to the west and diminishing down to 10 to 15 knots, and finally becoming northeast 10 knots north of Cold Bay. For the Aleutian Islands on Saturday, we'll start off by the eastern Aleutians where we have westerly winds 10 to 15 knots, becoming northerly by the central Aleutians 15 to 25 knots, stronger on the Pacific side, up to as high as 30 knots out of a northwesterly direction as we get west of Adak, and then by Shimia we have westerly winds 20 knots. Then on Sunday, all winds becoming more westerly, 15 to 20 knots throughout the area, a little bit weaker north of the eastern Aleutians, where we see 10 knots out of that westerly direction. Along the west coast for Saturday, 15 knots out of the northeast for most locations, a little bit stronger by the Pribilofs at northeast winds 20 knots there. Seas as high as 4 feet by St. Matthew Island and the Pribilof Islands. For Sunday, northerly winds throughout the area 15 to 20 knots, seas as high as 5 feet, highest by St. Matthew Island. As you look up along the Arctic coastline, southeasterly winds 20 knots are expected. Northwestern portions of the state, westerly winds 10 to 15 knots, becoming easterly by the Kotzebue Sound area and through the strait, 10 to 15 knots are expected. Then on Sunday, along the Arctic coastline, westerly winds 20 knots, extending down towards the Point Hope area, or Point Lay area, and then down along the west coast, northerly winds 15 to 20 knots are expected. Recap of tonight's weather: high pressure dominating mainland Alaska, especially up north, keeping the precipitation further to the south, where we will have some lighter snow showers in the Copper River Basin, and rain all along the North Gulf Coast, with the heaviest rain for the southern areas of the Panhandle, as we have a new frontal system pushing into the area, bringing with it quite a bit of moisture and warmer air. Some of them are northern locations in the Panhandle, expecting to see a mix of rain and snow, especially at higher elevations. Out over the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, some light rain showers are expected. And then our stalling front out over the central Aleutians, near the western Aleutians as well, bringing some rain to the area. As we move into Saturday, expecting that front to slowly push to the north and east, continuing to bring rain to the central and western Aleutians. Some light rain showers for the eastern Aleutians are expected as well. Out over mainland Alaska, high pressure continues to dominate, with ridging extending out into the interior portions of the state, keeping precipitation at bay and bringing some fair weather to mainland Alaska. For Kodiak Island, expecting to see some lighter rain showers. And then for the Panhandle area, our low pressure is pushing into southern portions of the Panhandle, keeping heavier rain for southern locations. That rain diminishing as we get further to the north. And then as we get towards the Yakutat, rain should stay away.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.